Have you ever felt caught up in the whirlwind of life? The pressures from work, family, and society can sometimes leave us feeling exhausted and overwhelmed. We often find ourselves trying to please others, seeking validation, and, in the process, forgetting something incredibly important, ourselves. Today, let's embark on a journey to explore lessons from Buddhist teachings. These insights will not only help you find peace within, but also empower you to step beyond life's daily concerns and live with deeper meaning and serenity. The journey to self-discovery begins now. Are you ready? Have you ever thought that true happiness doesn't depend on those around you? This question may seem simple, but it contains a profound insight that has inspired countless seekers on their journey to inner peace. In the world we live in today, it's easy to fall into the belief that happiness comes from others' recognition, from external achievements, or from things we possess. But Buddhism teaches us something different. Happiness is not a gift that someone else can give you, nor a prize you win from life. Instead, it is a state of mind that can only be cultivated from within. To illustrate this point, let's look at the story of an ambitious young man named Devdatta, whose journey reflects the struggles many of us face. Devdatta was intelligent, talented, and driven by a desire to make his mark on the world. From a young age, he believed that he needed the admiration and validation of others to feel complete. He worked tirelessly to excel, and each achievement brought him a fleeting sense of pride. But no matter how successful he became, the happiness he sought always seemed just beyond his grasp. Whenever the applause faded, he felt emptier than before, and his heart was burdened with the need for constant validation. One day, while visiting a Buddhist monastery, Devdatta heard a teaching from an old monk. The monk told a story about a man who spent his whole life chasing shadows, hoping that one day his shadow would embrace him back. He ran and ran, but his shadow was always a step ahead, forever beyond his reach. Eventually, the man collapsed, exhausted and empty. "The shadows we chase," the monk explained, "are the desires and validations we seek from others. True contentment lies not in chasing shadows, but in turning inward, where the light of the mind dispels all darkness." Intrigued, Devdatta stayed at the monastery and began practicing meditation, which he initially found challenging. In the silence of meditation, he faced the very insecurities he had spent years trying to escape. But with each day, he began to recognize that happiness wasn't something anyone else could give him. He started to understand that his worth was inherent. It wasn't dependent on others' opinions. Gradually, Devdatta let go of his need for external approval and found a quiet joy that came from within. This story exemplifies one of Buddhism's key teachings. The dependency on external factors for happiness is like building a house on shifting sand. When our happiness depends on others, on achievements, or on circumstances beyond our control, it becomes fragile and fleeting. Buddhism teaches that true happiness is independent of external conditions. It is born from a deep understanding of oneself and from a sense of peace that no one can take away. In Buddhist thought, this concept is closely related to the idea of non-attachment. When we become attached to the opinions, praise, or validation of others, we surrender our peace to forces we can't control. Non-attachment does not mean withdrawing from life or isolating oneself from others. Rather, it is the practice of engaging fully in life while understanding that our sense of self-worth does not depend on how others perceive us. We can appreciate others' kindness without needing their approval to feel whole. Another renowned story that embodies this wisdom is that of the Buddha himself. who faced countless challenges and even criticism. After attaining enlightenment, Buddha encountered people who doubted, criticized, and even attempted to harm him. When asked how he maintained his serenity in the face of such negativity, the Buddha responded with a parable about a gift. He explained that if someone offers a gift and the recipient declines to accept it, the gift remains with the giver. Similarly, when others offered him anger, resentment, or disdain, he chose not to accept these gifts of negativity. By not internalizing others' judgments, he remained anchored in his peace and compassion. This lesson applies to us as well. Our well-being is not dependent on how others treat us or what they think of us. When we cultivate inner contentment, we become resilient to the highs and lows of external praise and criticism. In Buddhism, this inner stability is known as equanimity, a balanced state of mind that remains undisturbed by life's inevitable ups and downs. But how do we cultivate this inner peace in our everyday lives? Meditation is a powerful tool that helps us observe our thoughts without judgment. By practicing mindfulness, we learn to let go of thoughts that disturb our peace and instead focus on the present moment. In the process, we begin to connect with a quiet happiness that doesn't depend on circumstances or other people. Another approach is the practice of gratitude. When we constantly seek validation from others, we overlook the blessings that are already present in our lives. Gratitude shifts our focus from what we lack to what we have, reminding us that our life is already filled with moments of joy and peace if we choose to see them. By nurturing gratitude, we reduce our dependency on others' approval and create a foundation of self-acceptance. The journey to inner happiness is not about isolating ourselves from others, but about finding a source of joy that remains steady regardless of external influences. Just as the Buddha reminded his followers, happiness is a state of mind that flourishes when we cultivate self-awareness, self-compassion, and non-attachment. In essence, this chapter encourages us to look within, to confront our insecurities, and to break free from the habit of seeking happiness from others. True happiness is like a lotus flower that blooms from the depths of our own heart, untouched by the mud of worldly attachments. As we continue to explore Buddhist wisdom, we find that the path to lasting joy lies not in the fleeting validation of others, but in the inner peace that blossoms from a heart content with itself. Loneliness is not weakness. It is where you discover your inner strength. This idea challenges common misconceptions in our society, where solitude is often confused with isolation or even failure to connect. In Buddhism, however, solitude is not viewed as a burden, but as a sacred space for self-discovery, wisdom, and spiritual growth. True solitude allows us to confront the layers of ourselves without distractions, revealing truths that often remain hidden in the rush of daily life. One well-known Buddhist story of solitude involves the Zen master Ryokan, who chose to live alone in a humble mountain hut. He found profound peace and clarity in his simple surroundings, filling his days with meditation, poetry, and quiet reflection. Although he lived in seclusion, he deeply connected with nature and understood himself more completely. There is a story of him once finding a thief in his hut, only to respond with compassion. "If you wish to take something, take my clothes. I don't want you leaving empty-handed." This gentle humor and detachment from material possessions were symbols of his inner freedom, achieved through years of solitude and contemplation. Ryokan taught that isolation was not an escape, but rather a way to see the world more clearly and discover the quiet strength within. Another inspiring story comes from the Buddha himself, who, before his enlightenment, retreated to the wilderness to understand suffering and the human condition. During his time of solitude under the Bodhi tree, he encountered internal battles, fears, and doubts. Instead of running from these feelings, he sat with them and explored them deeply. By facing his own mind in isolation, he achieved enlightenment, realizing that inner strength comes from facing our challenges directly. The Buddha's time in solitude became a lesson for his followers, to look within for wisdom rather than relying on the outside world for validation or answers. Solitude, therefore, becomes an opportunity to face ourselves, a chance to learn and grow. In Buddhist practice, retreating into solitude is not uncommon and is often done intentionally for deep self-reflection and meditation. Monks will frequently go on extended retreats, sometimes for months or years, to work through their thoughts and emotions and develop resilience. By cultivating patience, clarity, and acceptance, they emerge stronger, with a balanced mind and a clearer purpose. Through solitude, we learn to sit with our discomfort, insecurities, and desires. At first, the silence may be unsettling as we face aspects of ourselves that we often overlook. However, this process helps us develop patience and resilience. As the noise fades, we begin to hear our inner voice, gaining insight into our fears and attachments. We learn to release the need for external validation and instead build a solid foundation of self-understanding and compassion. Buddhism teaches that the mind, like a lake, becomes clear and still only when we remove the disturbances. Solitude allows us to remove the disturbances of daily life, the constant interactions and demands, and instead focus inward. When we sit alone with our thoughts, the mental chatter initially feels overwhelming, but in time, the mind settles, revealing a deep calmness and clarity. This clarity, achieved through solitude, brings a profound sense of freedom. In our modern world, solitude is often misunderstood or even feared, yet embracing it offers profound benefits. Solitude helps us understand our emotions, motivations, and fears, allowing us to confront the underlying reasons behind our actions. Through meditation and reflection, we can explore the roots of our attachments, insecurities, and desires, learning to let go of those that no longer serve us. The teachings of Buddhist solitude also emphasize that one does not need to isolate oneself completely to experience its benefits. Even brief periods of intentional solitude, like a day of silent reflection or a morning meditation, can foster self-awareness and inner strength. These practices encourage us to cultivate mindfulness in all that we do, to approach our lives with a calm and centered mind, and to respond to life's challenges with clarity rather than reactivity. Solitude allows us to find strength within and become our own source of happiness and peace. We learn that true strength is not about external achievements or social approval, but about resilience, compassion, and a deep understanding of ourselves. As we become comfortable with solitude, we realize that we carry a boundless source of strength within. Imagine reflecting on this question. Do you need others' acceptance to feel confident? It's a question that can be both confronting and enlightening, especially in a world where social media and societal expectations can make us crave validation from others. In Buddhism, the pursuit of approval from others is viewed as a form of attachment, a dependence that creates suffering. By seeking constant affirmation from the outside, we lose sight of our intrinsic worth and drift away from authentic happiness. Buddhism encourages us to look inward, to cultivate self-acceptance, and to realize that true confidence comes from within, not from others' opinions. One powerful story of self-liberation from others' approval involves a famous artist who always sought praise from those around him. He initially thought that his art would be valuable only if others appreciated it. Every compliment lifted his spirits, but every criticism weighed him down, leaving him with a constant cycle of self-doubt and anxiety. Eventually, he grew weary of this dependence on others' opinions and realized that it was making him unhappy. He decided to create art for himself, focusing on the joy of the creative process rather than the opinions of others. As he embraced this perspective, he experienced true satisfaction and confidence for the first time, free from the need for external approval. This lesson echoes in the Buddha's teachings on self-compassion and non-attachment. One of the Buddha's teachings tells the story of a woman who had to learn the hard lesson of finding self-worth without external validation. Kisagami, a young mother who lost her only son, went from house to house seeking medicine to bring her child back to life. In desperation, she was advised to seek out the Buddha, who listened to her pain and told her to find a mustard seed from any home that had not experienced loss. After a long search, she realized that every household had known some form of suffering, and she began to understand that life's value was not in her son's life alone, but in accepting the reality of impermanence. Through this experience, she let go of her attachment, recognizing that clinging to external circumstances only deepened her suffering. Her liberation came from accepting the nature of life and finding strength within herself to move forward. Buddhist teachings remind us that when we depend on others' validation, we're handing over control of our happiness and self-worth to forces beyond ourselves. In a story of the Buddha's own life, there's an account where a critic insulted him publicly. Instead of reacting, the Buddha calmly asked, "If someone offers you a gift and you decline it, to whom does the gift belong?" The critic replied, "To the person who offered it." The Buddha then explained, "I do not accept your words, so they remain with you." This story highlights the Buddha's profound understanding that self-worth does not need to be affected by others' opinions. By not accepting the gift of criticism, he demonstrated the power of inner stability and detachment from others' judgments. The quest for external approval is deeply rooted in human nature, yet Buddhism teaches that the more we seek validation outside ourselves, the more we drift from inner peace. By practicing mindfulness and meditation, we can start to witness our own patterns of self-judgment and need for approval. In these practices, we observe our thoughts without attaching to them, letting go of the urge to please others and discovering the power of self-acceptance. This doesn't mean we stop valuing others' perspectives, but that our self-worth no longer depends on them. We learn to appreciate feedback as information rather than a measure of our value. The Buddhist path encourages us to practice metta, or loving kindness, which includes extending kindness and acceptance to ourselves. This inner compassion can counteract the inner critic that fuels the desire for approval. Instead of judging ourselves by external standards, we learn to embrace our inherent worth. This mindset allows us to engage with the world more authentically, without the weight of constantly needing others' affirmation. We are free to express ourselves and to live in alignment with our values, finding joy in our pursuits because they reflect our true selves, not because they please others. When we stop seeking validation outside, we unlock a sense of liberation and peace. This freedom enables us to live more fully, with a sense of purpose that isn't swayed by others' opinions. We come to understand that the approval we sought was an illusion, a temporary high that could never bring lasting satisfaction. Instead, we cultivate a deep, stable contentment grounded in self-awareness and acceptance. Have you ever wondered about the true meaning of rejection? Is rejection really a failure, or is it perhaps an opportunity in disguise? In Buddhism, rejection is seen not as an endpoint but as a lesson in resilience, acceptance, and inner growth. Rather than being something that closes doors, rejection teaches us to detach from external outcomes and find strength and value in our own journey. One insightful story from Buddhist teaching centers around a merchant who faced numerous rejections and setbacks in his life. This merchant, driven by the desire to achieve success, attempted many business ventures. However, each attempt seemed to meet with resistance, rejection, and failure. At first, he felt that every rejection was a reflection of his inadequacy. But over time, he began to see these setbacks as lessons, each one teaching him something about patience, humility, and adaptability. With each failed venture, he refined his approach, became more aware of his motivations, and grew resilient. Eventually, his patience paid off, and he achieved great success, but by that time, he had transformed internally. He had learned that the true victory was not in wealth, but in his ability to rise after each fall, to learn, and to keep going. In Buddhism, rejection is often viewed as a tool for spiritual growth rather than a form of punishment or failure. There's a story of a monk named Punna, who expressed his wish to travel to a remote and dangerous village to spread the teachings of the Buddha. When the Buddha asked him how he would respond if the villagers insulted or rejected him, Punna calmly replied that he would be grateful that they didn't physically harm him. When asked how he would react if they did physically harm him, Punna responded that he would be grateful they didn't kill him. And if they tried to kill him? Punna said he would accept death with gratitude, knowing he had lived according to his purpose. This profound acceptance of all possibilities, including the possibility of rejection, shows how deeply the practice of detachment and resilience can change one's perspective. For Punna, the possibility of rejection was not a deterrent, but a test of his own understanding and inner strength. The Buddhist philosophy teaches that rejection is often rooted in attachment to specific outcomes. When we are attached to success, to approval, or to the validation of others, we are bound to suffer when things don't go our way. But by embracing rejection as a natural part of life, we can free ourselves from this attachment and cultivate a mindset of acceptance and equanimity. Rejection becomes a moment of insight, teaching us that our worth is not defined by others' approval or by external success. Another story that illustrates the Buddhist approach to rejection is that of a young seeker who wanted to become a monk. Time and again, he approached the monastery, only to be told by the head monk that he wasn't ready. Each rejection hurt deeply, but he persisted, returning every few months to ask for acceptance. Over the years, his character developed, and he became more humble, more disciplined, and more compassionate. One day, after years of rejection, he was finally accepted. The head monk then revealed that he had always intended to accept the young man, but he saw that the repeated rejections were necessary to help him grow into the monk he was meant to become. In this way, rejection was not an obstacle, but the very path to his spiritual readiness. Through these stories, Buddhism encourages us to see rejection not as a blow to our self-worth, but as a way to practice patience, resilience, and wisdom. Rejection teaches us to pause, reflect, and understand our desires and motivations. Instead of immediately labeling it as a failure, we can ask, "What is this moment trying to teach me?" This shift in perspective opens us to the possibility that every rejection may be a redirection, guiding us toward a more meaningful path or preparing us for something greater. In our everyday lives, rejection can feel personal and painful, whether it's in relationships, career, or social circles. But if we look at it through the lens of Buddhist wisdom, we can start to let go of the need for external validation and become more rooted in our inner values. Rejection helps us build a foundation of self-acceptance and detachment from transient successes or failures. As the Buddha taught, everything in life is impermanent, and our experiences of rejection are no exception. By accepting this impermanence, we free ourselves from suffering and begin to find peace, knowing that our true worth isn't swayed by external approval. In this journey, meditation and mindfulness become essential tools. Through regular meditation, we can observe the thoughts and emotions that arise in response to rejection without attaching to them. We can watch feelings of disappointment or unworthiness rise and fall, just like waves in the ocean, knowing that they, too, will pass. By practicing non-attachment, we learn to see rejection as a fleeting experience that doesn't define us. Instead, it becomes part of our path to self-discovery and spiritual growth. Ultimately, rejection and failure are not opposites of success, but integral steps along the way. Each setback we face is a moment to strengthen our resolve, deepen our understanding, and approach life with greater wisdom and compassion. Instead of viewing rejection as a roadblock, we can embrace it as a stepping stone on our path, leading us toward a more profound understanding of ourselves and the nature of life itself. Do you find yourself haunted by the thought of what others think of you? The fear of judgment is a powerful force, shaping how we behave, what we say, and even how we view ourselves. In Buddhist teachings, attachment to others' opinions is seen as a form of suffering, trapping us in a cycle of self-doubt and anxiety. When we learn to release this attachment, we unlock a deep freedom, a freedom to be true to ourselves, unhindered by the constant need for external approval. A story that illustrates this theme is about a young man who was perpetually worried about how others perceived him. Growing up, he was praised for his achievements, which became his source of confidence and identity. But as he grew older, he realized that he was living more for others than for himself, always fearful of being judged or misunderstood. This young man eventually met a monk who guided him through the practice of meditation. Over time, through sitting in silence and observing his thoughts, he began to notice how his mind constantly sought validation from others. By recognizing this habit, he gradually learned to separate himself from it. The young man discovered that when he let go of his fear of judgment, he felt a new sense of lightness and freedom, allowing him to express himself authentically without the need to impress others. Buddhism teaches that the fear of judgment is rooted in the ego. When we focus on what others think of us, we are placing importance on our self, an identity that we believe we must maintain in the eyes of others. However, the Buddha taught that this self is merely a construct, a collection of thoughts and attachments that we cling to. Realizing that the self is impermanent and ever-changing can help us loosen the grip of our ego and free ourselves from the fear of judgment. Another story that highlights this wisdom is that of an enlightened monk named Hakuin. A young woman in Hakuin's village became pregnant, and in her panic, she claimed that Hakuin was the father. When her family confronted him, he simply replied, "Is that so?" showing neither anger nor defense. Despite his innocence, he accepted responsibility for the child and took care of the baby without complaint. After a year, the young woman admitted the truth, and her family apologized to Hakwin, who again replied, "Is that so?" Hakwin's calm acceptance and detachment from others' opinions revealed a profound freedom from judgment. He understood that others' beliefs about him did not change his true nature or affect his inner peace. Through his example, we see that releasing the fear of judgment allows us to act in accordance with our principles without being swayed by the world's opinions. The practice of mindfulness and meditation is essential in helping us transcend the fear of judgment. Through mindful awareness, we can observe our thoughts and emotions, including our fear of what others might think, without letting them control us. As we cultivate a mindful practice, we start to see our thoughts as passing phenomena, like clouds drifting across the sky. Instead of identifying with them, we simply watch them come and go, realizing that they do not define us. This process helps us understand that others' judgments are also temporary, and that they do not hold the power to shape who we are. In everyday life, we often react to judgment with defensiveness or self-consciousness. Buddhism encourages us to approach such moments with equanimity. For instance, when someone criticizes us, instead of reacting or feeling hurt, we can pause and ask, "Is this judgment a reflection of who I am, or is it simply this person's perspective?" This questioning helps us understand that judgment is often more about the other person's view and not an objective truth. By viewing judgment with detachment, we learn to take criticism constructively or simply let it go. The Buddha himself faced countless criticisms and misunderstandings during his life. Some viewed his teachings as radical or foolish, and others dismissed him as a mere ascetic. Yet, he remained unaffected, knowing that his path was rooted in compassion and wisdom. His unshakable peace amidst criticism is a reminder that true contentment lies in aligning with our values and not in the approval of others. When we follow our inner path with sincerity, judgments from others lose their weight, and we can remain steadfast in our journey. Another profound teaching that resonates here is the story of the Buddha and the angry man. Once, a man came to the Buddha and began to insult him. The Buddha listened calmly without reacting. Finally, the Buddha asked, "If someone offers you a gift and you do not accept it, to whom does the gift belong?" The man answered, "To the one who offers it." The Buddha replied, "In the same way, if I do not accept your insults, they remain with you." This story emphasizes that we have the power to accept or reject others' judgments. By choosing not to internalize negativity, we protect our peace and continue on our path with clarity. Through these teachings, Buddhism offers us a path to free ourselves from the prison of external validation. The opinions of others are like waves on the surface of the ocean. They may ripple and disturb the surface, but they do not change the ocean's depths. When we focus on our inner values and intentions, we connect with a deeper, unshakable sense of self that is unaffected by superficial judgments. To truly let go of the fear of judgment, we must cultivate self-compassion and trust in our own journey. When we are kind to ourselves and recognize our worth beyond others' opinions, we feel less inclined to seek validation externally. Instead, we find contentment in simply being, knowing that our essence is beyond approval or criticism. By letting go of the need to be liked, respected, or validated by everyone, we open ourselves to a new level of freedom, a freedom where we can live authentically and without fear. In the end, freeing ourselves from the fear of judgment is about embracing our own path wholeheartedly. By grounding ourselves in mindfulness, compassion, and inner strength, we learn to walk through life with confidence, unburdened by others' views. We come to understand that true peace lies not in the approval of the world, but in the calm assurance of knowing we are enough, just as we are. Do you ever find yourself constantly trying to please others while neglecting your own happiness? Many of us fall into the trap of sacrificing our peace, joy, and well-being for the sake of others, whether it's a family member, a friend, or a colleague. We believe that by prioritizing their needs over our own, we will find happiness in their approval or gratitude. Yet, over time, we may realize that this self-sacrifice leaves us depleted, frustrated, and distant from our own inner peace. In the teachings of Buddhism, this kind of self-neglect is seen as an attachment to the idea of selflessness, which, when taken to extremes, can actually lead to suffering for both ourselves and others. The path to true compassion, according to the Buddha, is not to give until we are empty, but to care for ourselves so that we may share our love and joy with others from a place of abundance. There is a story of a mother who, for many years, poured her heart into taking care of her family. Every day, she worked tirelessly to ensure that everyone else's needs were met, cooking meals, managing the household, caring for her children, and doing everything she could to make sure her husband and loved ones were happy. But despite all her efforts, she was often exhausted, overwhelmed, and felt unappreciated. She thought that by sacrificing her own happiness and peace for the well-being of her family, she was being a good mother and wife. Yet, she felt empty inside, and her joy was slowly fading away. It was only when she attended a meditation retreat that she began to understand the importance of self-care. Through mindfulness and reflection, she realized that by neglecting her own well-being, she wasn't able to give her family the best of herself. She wasn't present in the way she wanted to be, and her well-intentioned sacrifices had begun to breed resentment rather than love. The turning point came when she understood that self-care was not a selfish act, but an essential one. By taking time for herself, whether through quiet moments of reflection, meditation, or simply doing something she loved, she started to reconnect with her inner peace. She found that when she nurtured her own happiness and health, she could be a better mother, a more patient wife, and a more loving person overall. Her family noticed the change, and they, too, began to thrive in the environment she cultivated, where everyone's needs, including her own, were respected. This story teaches us that when we give from a place of emptiness, we cannot truly help anyone. However, when we take the time to fill ourselves with love, peace, and happiness, we can offer these gifts to others without depleting ourselves. In Buddhist philosophy, the idea of self-sacrifice is often misunderstood. The Buddha taught that true compassion is not about endlessly giving to others at the expense of ourselves, but about cultivating a balanced and loving mind that can offer kindness without attachment. Buddhism emphasizes the middle way, a path of balance between extremes. If we give too much of ourselves, we may become resentful or feel unappreciated, and if we take too much without giving, we may become selfish. The middle way encourages us to care for others without losing sight of our own needs, fostering a harmonious existence for ourselves and those around us. One famous Buddhist story that exemplifies this balance is the tale of the Buddha and the woman named Kisagami. Kisagami was deeply grieving the death of her young child and sought the Buddha's help. The Buddha instructed her to find mustard seeds from a house where no one had ever died. Kisagami traveled from house to house, but everywhere she went, she found that death had touched everyone in some way. Through this journey, she came to understand the universality of suffering and loss. The Buddha's message was not to abandon grief or self-care, but rather to recognize that suffering is part of life. By accepting it, we free ourselves from attachment to outcomes and realize that caring for ourselves and others requires balance. Another important teaching comes from the Buddha's own life. After attaining enlightenment, he could have easily chosen to live a life of isolation, free from the demands of others. However, he chose to share his wisdom with the world, teaching countless people how to end their suffering. Yet, throughout his life, the Buddha took time for solitude and reflection. He understood that in order to guide others, he needed to maintain his own inner peace. He did not sacrifice his well-being to help others. Rather, he helped others because he was at peace with himself. Similarly, the Buddha's disciples were encouraged to find their own path to enlightenment. For example, when a monk named Sariputta became disheartened by the suffering he saw around him, the Buddha told him, "You must not give up the path of inner peace. It is in your own happiness that you can bring happiness to others." This message reinforces the idea that we cannot effectively help others if we are not in a place of balance and well-being. When we care for ourselves, we are not only enriching our own lives, but also creating an environment in which others can flourish. The practice of mindfulness in daily life is crucial in helping us recognize when we are overextending ourselves for the sake of others. Through mindful awareness, we become attuned to our emotions and physical states, noticing when we feel overwhelmed or resentful. By acknowledging these feelings, we can make conscious choices to care for ourselves, whether by setting boundaries, asking for help, or taking time to relax. Meditation practices help us center ourselves and create a calm, clear mind, allowing us to give with generosity and compassion rather than from a place of exhaustion. In the modern world, many people feel pressure to be constantly available for others, often at the expense of their own well-being. This is especially true in familial relationships, where the roles of mother, father, or caregiver are often linked to self-sacrifice. However, Buddhism teaches that we must not lose sight of our own happiness in the service of others. True compassion arises when we are at peace with ourselves and our lives, allowing us to offer our love and support without draining our own energy. In conclusion, Buddhism encourages us to stop sacrificing our peace for the sake of others. By recognizing the importance of self-care, we can approach life with balance and compassion. When we nurture our own well-being, we are better equipped to care for others and bring positivity into their lives. Through the teachings of the Buddha, we learn that true happiness comes not from self-sacrifice, but from cultivating inner peace, kindness, and self-love. Only then can we share our love with others, not from a place of depletion, but from a place of abundance. How often do you find yourself trying to change things beyond your control? In today's fast-paced world, many of us are caught up in the desire to control everything around us. The people in our lives, the outcomes of our efforts, the course of events. But the more we try to control things outside of our reach, the more stressed and anxious we become. The truth is, we cannot control everything, and trying to do so often leads to frustration and burnout. In the teachings of Buddhism, there is a profound lesson about focusing on what we can control, our own thoughts, actions, and responses. By letting go of the need to control the external world, we can begin to experience peace and mastery over our own lives. The Buddha's wisdom teaches us that true power lies in our ability to control ourselves and how we respond to the world around us. There is a story of a leader, a man who was highly successful in his professional life. However, his ambition and desire to control everything around him left him feeling constantly exhausted. He micromanaged his team, set unrealistic expectations for himself, and spent his days worried about how everything was going to unfold. Despite his outward success, he felt an underlying sense of unease and stress. His relationships with his colleagues and loved ones began to suffer, and he often found himself overwhelmed. One day, a friend recommended he try meditation, suggesting that it might help him find peace and clarity. Reluctantly, he agreed. As he began his meditation practice, he realized that much of his anxiety stemmed from his constant need to control everything. He was focusing on things he had no power over, other people's actions, the outcomes of events, and the future. Through mindfulness and meditation, he started to understand the core Buddhist teaching that we cannot control external events, but we can control our reactions to them. He learned that true peace comes not from controlling the world around us, but from mastering our own mind and how we respond to challenges. This man began to apply these teachings in his daily life. Instead of trying to control his employees or force outcomes, he shifted his focus to controlling his own actions. He became more mindful of his thoughts and emotions, learning to respond to situations with calm and clarity rather than frustration and stress. He started setting boundaries for himself, knowing when to delegate, when to step back, and when to let go. His relationships improved, his stress levels decreased, and he began to feel a sense of freedom and ease he had never experienced before. The lesson here is clear. We cannot control everything, but we can control ourselves. The Buddha taught that we should focus on cultivating inner peace, wisdom, and compassion. When we take responsibility for our own thoughts and actions, we find a sense of empowerment that is not dependent on external circumstances. By focusing on our own growth and responding to life with mindfulness, we reduce stress and increase our capacity for happiness. A famous Buddhist story that illustrates this principle is the tale of the Buddha and the monk who struggled with anger. This monk was often irritated by the actions of others and found it difficult to maintain his composure. One day, the Buddha asked him, "Why do you let the actions of others disturb your peace?" The monk replied, "I cannot control the behavior of others, and it makes me angry." The Buddha explained that while we cannot control others, we can control how we react to them. He encouraged the monk to practice mindfulness and self-awareness, observing his thoughts and emotions without getting attached to them. Over time, the monk learned to let go of his anger, realizing that his peace was within his own control. This story teaches us that while we may not be able to control the actions of others, we have the power to choose how we respond to them. Another relevant story comes from the life of the Buddha himself. After attaining enlightenment, the Buddha was approached by many people seeking his guidance. Some came with doubts, others with requests for material aid, and still others with questions about the nature of existence. Throughout his life, the Buddha remained calm and composed, never allowing himself to be swayed by the external circumstances. He understood that he could not control the actions of others, but he could control his own responses. This inner calm allowed him to teach with clarity and compassion, offering wisdom to those who sought it without getting caught up in the chaos of the world around him. In Buddhist philosophy, this concept is referred to as right effort, one of the steps on the Noble Eightfold Path. Right effort involves cultivating the right attitude and mental discipline to focus on what we can control, our own thoughts, actions, and emotions, while letting go of the desire to control things beyond our influence. Through right effort, we learn to approach life with a sense of balance, understanding that there are things we can change and things we must accept. This acceptance does not mean resignation, but rather a deep understanding of the impermanence of life and the wisdom to focus on our own growth. In our modern world, it is easy to get caught up in the illusion of control. We live in a society that encourages us to take charge of every aspect of our lives, from our careers to our relationships, and even our personal happiness. However, this constant striving for control often leads to stress, anxiety, and frustration. The Buddhist teachings remind us that true control lies in our ability to master our own minds and actions, rather than in the external world. By focusing on what we can control, our thoughts, emotions, and reactions, we free ourselves from the grip of stress and anxiety, and we create space for peace and contentment. Mindfulness practices are essential in helping us stay grounded in the present moment and focused on what we can control. Through mindfulness, we become aware of our thoughts and emotions as they arise, allowing us to choose how to respond. We learn not to be swept away by external circumstances, but to remain centered and calm, regardless of what happens around us. This practice helps us develop a sense of inner strength and resilience, allowing us to face life's challenges with clarity and composure. In conclusion, focusing on what we can control is a powerful way to reduce stress, increase happiness, and cultivate peace. By letting go of the need to control everything outside of ourselves and instead focusing on our own thoughts, actions, and responses, we can find a sense of empowerment and inner peace. The teachings of the Buddha remind us that true freedom comes from mastering ourselves, not from trying to control the world around us. When we practice mindfulness and right effort, we can approach life with greater clarity, wisdom, and compassion, and ultimately live a life that is more peaceful and fulfilling. Have you ever felt like you are constantly being watched or judged by others? In a world that places a strong emphasis on external validation, it's easy to become overly concerned with how others perceive us. We may fear being criticized, judged, or compared to others, which can lead to self-doubt and a lack of confidence. The reality, however, is often quite different from what we imagine. People are generally far more focused on their own lives and struggles than they are on judging others. The Buddha's teachings offer a profound perspective on this, reminding us that we are not the center of everyone's attention and that most people are consumed by their own concerns. Once we truly understand this, we can free ourselves from the fear of judgment and embrace a more authentic, confident way of living. There is a story of a young man who was constantly worried about what others thought of him. He would overanalyze every conversation, scrutinize his appearance, and worry that people were silently judging him. His fear of judgment was so overwhelming that it began to affect his ability to enjoy life. He was anxious in social situations, hesitant to share his opinions, and often found himself second-guessing his actions. One day, he confided in an elderly friend about his concerns, and the friend gave him a piece of advice that changed his perspective. "You're not the only one who feels this way. Everyone else is also consumed by their own lives. Most people are too busy thinking about their own problems to focus on you." At first, the young man was skeptical, but as he reflected on this, he realized the truth in his friend's words. People were not as focused on him as he had imagined. In fact, they were likely just as preoccupied with their own concerns and insecurities. The more he observed the behavior of those around him, the more he understood that everyone had their own battles to fight. People were busy with their jobs, relationships, health, and personal struggles, just as he was. Once he accepted this truth, he began to feel lighter, as if a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. His fear of judgment slowly faded, and he found the courage to express himself more freely and confidently. This story illustrates a powerful lesson. Most of us spend far too much energy worrying about what others think of us, but in reality, most people are too absorbed in their own lives to give us the kind of attention we fear. This realization is liberating because it allows us to stop worrying about other people's opinions and to focus on living more authentically. The Buddha's teachings emphasize that the root of suffering often lies in our attachment to the opinions of others. When we release this attachment, we can find peace and freedom. In Buddhist philosophy, this idea is closely linked to the concept of anatta, the doctrine of non-self. This teaching suggests that the self is not as solid or permanent as we might think. We often see ourselves as separate individuals, constantly striving to maintain a particular image or reputation. However, the Buddha taught that the sense of self is not fixed. It is constantly changing and interconnected with others. When we let go of the ego-driven desire to be seen in a certain way, we begin to experience a deeper sense of connection and peace. We understand that others are not judging us as we often imagine, and that their attention is focused on their own lives, not on us. The Buddha also taught that we should be mindful of our thoughts and actions, not because we are worried about how others perceive us, but because we want to cultivate a mind that is peaceful, compassionate, and free from attachment. When we are not preoccupied with the judgment of others, we are able to live with more clarity and authenticity. This aligns with the practice of sila, ethical conduct, in Buddhism, where we act in ways that align with our true values, without the need for external validation. By focusing on our own integrity and mindfulness, we become less concerned with how we are perceived and more focused on how we live and grow. A famous story from the Buddha's life illustrates this teaching. One day, a man approached the Buddha, intending to insult him. He shouted harsh words at the Buddha, trying to provoke him. However, the Buddha remained calm and composed, unaffected by the man's words. The man, frustrated by the lack of response, asked the Buddha, "Aren't you angry at me for what I've said?" The Buddha replied, "If someone offers you a gift and you do not accept it, to whom does the gift belong?" The man answered, "It belongs to the person who offered it." The Buddha smiled and said, "In the same way, when you offer your insults to me, I do not accept them. Therefore, they remain with you." This story demonstrates the Buddha's ability to rise above the opinions of others and illustrates the importance of not internalizing judgment or criticism. It is a powerful reminder that the judgment of others does not define us, and that we are in control of how we respond to others' actions. The Buddha's teachings on right view and right speech also help us understand how to navigate the complexities of human interactions without being overly concerned with others' judgments. When we practice right view, we see the world and ourselves clearly, without the distortion of ego or attachment. Right speech encourages us to speak truthfully and kindly, not out of a desire to impress others or gain approval, but from a place of sincerity and compassion. By embodying these principles, we can interact with others in a way that is genuine and free from the need for validation. Another aspect of Buddhist philosophy that can help us move beyond the fear of judgment is the practice of loving kindness, metta. By cultivating compassion and goodwill toward others, we develop a deeper understanding that everyone is dealing with their own challenges. When we recognize the struggles that others face, we become less focused on how we appear to them and more focused on offering kindness and support. Loving kindness meditation, for example, is a practice where we wish happiness and peace for ourselves and others. This practice helps us shift from a mindset of fear and insecurity to one of empathy and connection. Ultimately, the lesson from this chapter is clear. People are often too focused on their own lives to judge us as we fear. The more we realize this, the more we can let go of our insecurities and live more freely. Buddhism teaches us that true happiness comes from within, not from external validation or approval. When we release our attachment to the opinions of others, we can live more authentically, experience greater peace, and build deeper connections with those around us. By focusing on our own growth, kindness, and mindfulness, we cultivate a life of greater freedom and confidence. Do you ever find yourself feeling disheartened after comparing yourself to others? In a world where social media and society often encourage comparisons, it's easy to fall into the trap of measuring our worth based on others' achievements, appearances, and lifestyles. We compare our lives to the seemingly perfect lives of those around us, and it can leave us feeling inadequate, frustrated, or even lost. The problem is, we often overlook the unique journey each person is on, and forget that our value is not defined by someone else's success. In Buddhism, the teachings encourage us to embrace ourselves as we are, let go of comparisons, and find peace in the present moment. When we stop comparing ourselves to others, we open the door to gratitude, self-acceptance, and true happiness. There is a story of a young man named Sam, who was constantly dissatisfied with his life because he was always comparing himself to others. He saw his peers excelling in their careers, enjoying perfect relationships, or acquiring material wealth, while he felt stuck in his own life. No matter how much he achieved, it never seemed enough. He often thought, if only I had what they have, I would be happier. This comparison game left him feeling drained and disillusioned. It was during a visit to a Buddhist temple that Sam had a moment of realization that would change his life. While attending a teaching by a monk, Sam learned about the Buddhist concept of dukkha, or suffering, which arises from attachment and craving. The monk explained that the constant desire for what others have leads to dissatisfaction, because it creates an unending cycle of comparison. The monk shared a simple yet profound story to illustrate this concept. He said, "Imagine a man who has a small house but looks over the fence at his neighbor's grand mansion. His desire for the mansion grows so strong that it overtakes his peace of mind. But if he were to shift his focus to the blessings of his own home, he would see that it is warm, safe, and filled with everything he needs. The more he compares, the less content he becomes. If he were to stop comparing and appreciate what he already has, he would find true contentment." Sam was deeply moved by this story. It made him realize that in his constant comparison, he had been overlooking the many blessings in his own life. He had a loving family, a job he enjoyed, and good health, things that many people long for. He had been so fixated on what others had that he could not appreciate the richness of his own life. It was in that moment that Sam understood that true happiness does not come from acquiring what others have, but from recognizing the value in what we already possess. Inspired by the teachings of the monk, Sam began practicing gratitude. Each day, He took a few moments to reflect on the things he was thankful for, whether it was a kind word from a friend, a peaceful moment in nature, or the joy of a good meal. He started to shift his mindset from one of comparison to one of acceptance and gratitude. Over time, he noticed a shift in his emotions. He felt more content, more at peace with himself, and more connected to his own path. Sam's story illustrates the power of shifting our perspective. Instead of measuring our worth against others, we can find happiness by embracing who we are and being thankful for what we have. Buddhism teaches us that when we stop comparing ourselves to others, we can cultivate a sense of inner peace that is not dependent on external circumstances. By living in the present moment and practicing gratitude, we open ourselves to a deeper sense of fulfillment. One of the core teachings of Buddhism that helps us let go of comparisons is the concept of anatta, non-self, which teaches that the self is not fixed or permanent. We often get caught up in the idea that we are defined by our achievements or possessions, but the Buddha reminds us that the self is constantly changing. Our true nature is not tied to comparison or competition, but to an acceptance of our impermanence and interconnectedness with others. When we understand that we are not separate from others, we can begin to let go of the need to measure our success against theirs. Another important teaching in Buddhism that helps us overcome the trap of comparison is the concept of mudita, or sympathetic joy. This teaching encourages us to take joy in the successes of others rather than feeling envious or resentful. When we rejoice in the happiness and achievements of others, we shift our focus from competition to celebration. Instead of feeling threatened by others' accomplishments, we can see them as opportunities for inspiration and growth. Mudita teaches us that there is enough happiness and success in the world for everyone, and that the joy of others does not diminish our own. A famous story in Buddhist tradition also highlights the futility of comparison. The Buddha once shared a parable about two monks who were walking through a forest. As they walked, they came across a stream, and one monk complained about how difficult it was to cross, as the water was fast and deep. The other monk, instead of comparing the difficulty of the stream to others' struggles, simply crossed the water with ease, focusing on the present moment and letting go of any fear or concern. The first monk, on the other hand, remained stuck, weighed down by his thoughts of how difficult the stream was. The Buddha used this story to show that when we focus on the difficulties of our situation and compare it to others, we often remain stuck in our suffering. However, when we accept our challenges and let go of comparison, we find the strength to move forward with ease. The Buddha also taught the importance of practicing mindfulness to overcome the tendency to compare ourselves to others. Through mindfulness, we learn to observe our thoughts and feelings without judgment. When we notice ourselves comparing, we can gently guide our awareness back to the present moment, where we can appreciate our own unique path and embrace our own experiences without the need for external validation. Mindfulness helps us break free from the cycle of comparison and live more fully in the present. In modern times, the message of letting go of comparison and cultivating self-acceptance is more relevant than ever. Social media, for example, often highlights the successes and idealized images of others, making it easy to fall into the trap of comparing ourselves to them. However, the Buddha's teachings encourage us to focus on our own journey and to appreciate the uniqueness of our path. By practicing gratitude, mindfulness, and self-compassion, we can stop the cycle of comparison and find true peace in the present moment. Ultimately, the lesson from this chapter is that comparison only leads to dissatisfaction. When we stop comparing ourselves to others and focus on being grateful for what we have, we create space for contentment and joy. Buddhism teaches us that happiness does not depend on external circumstances, but on our ability to embrace who we are and to live authentically. When we stop comparing, we can begin to live more fully and find peace in our own hearts. Do you find yourself living for the expectations of others? Do you feel a sense of fulfillment and joy when you follow your own path? Or do you feel lost and disconnected? In a world where societal pressures often dictate our decisions and values, it's easy to forget what truly matters to us as individuals. We might chase success, approval, or recognition from others without considering what our heart desires. The teachings of Buddhism remind us that living according to our true purpose, not the expectations of others, is the key to finding meaning, happiness, and inner peace. There is a story of a man named Leo, who spent much of his life trying to meet the expectations of his parents and society. Growing up, he was always told that success meant climbing the corporate ladder, owning a big house, and having a prestigious job. He followed this path, studying hard, working long hours, and building his career. Yet, despite his external success, Leo felt an emptiness inside. He would often wonder, is this all there is? His life, though outwardly perfect, felt hollow because it was not aligned with his true desires. One day, Leo met an old monk who had been living in a simple, modest temple for decades. The monk, with his calm and serene demeanor, spoke to Leo about the importance of living with purpose. He explained that the Buddha had taught that true happiness comes from living in alignment with one's own nature and not being swayed by external expectations. The monk shared a simple yet powerful teaching. When you live a life according to your own purpose, you find peace, not in the achievements you acquire, but in the alignment of your actions with your heart's desires. At first, Leo was skeptical. He thought, how can I just abandon everything I have worked for? However, the monk's words resonated deeply within him, and over time, Leo began to reflect on his own life. He realized that he had been living someone else's dream, the dream of his parents, society, and even his colleagues. He had sacrificed his own passions and dreams for a life of external success that didn't bring him true happiness. Leo decided to take a leap of faith. He left his high-paying corporate job and started to pursue his own passion, teaching children in underserved communities. This decision was not easy, and he faced resistance from his family and friends, who questioned his decision and wondered why he would throw away his career for something seemingly less glamorous. But Leo knew deep down that this was his true calling. He began to feel a sense of purpose that he had never felt before. Every day, he woke up with excitement, knowing that he was doing something meaningful with his life. In Buddhism, the concept of dharma refers to living in harmony with one's true nature and purpose. Each person has their unique path to follow, and it is through aligning our actions with this inner calling that we find true fulfillment. The Buddha taught that happiness and liberation are found not in external achievements or possessions, but in discovering and following our true path, the one that aligns with our inner wisdom and compassion. The story of Leo reflects this principle perfectly. As he began to follow his passion, he no longer felt lost or dissatisfied. His life gained meaning because he was living authentically. The monk's teaching had come alive for him. Living with purpose was not about achieving worldly success or approval, but about following one's heart and contributing to the well-being of others in the process. There is another story from Buddhist tradition that further illustrates this point. The Buddha himself, before his enlightenment, was a prince living in a palace with all the material wealth anyone could desire. Despite this, he felt a deep dissatisfaction with his life, knowing that he was not living in accordance with his true calling. He left behind his kingdom, family, and royal comforts to seek answers to the nature of suffering and the path to liberation. The Buddha's journey is an embodiment of living according to one's purpose, even if it means going against the expectations of others. His decision to leave his life of luxury and embark on a quest for truth ultimately led to the discovery of the Four Noble Truths and the path to enlightenment. The Buddha's story teaches us that living in alignment with our true nature, even when it seems contrary to the demands of the world, is the path to true freedom and happiness. The teachings of the Buddha emphasize that we each have our own dharma, our individual path in life. By aligning ourselves with our true purpose, we are not only able to find personal fulfillment, but we also contribute positively to the world. When we live authentically, we bring out the best in ourselves, and this, in turn, helps others. Whether it's through compassionate service, creative expression, or simply being true to our values, living with purpose creates ripples of positive energy that spread to those around us. However, living with purpose is not always an easy journey. There are challenges and sacrifices along the way. Society often tells us that success is defined by wealth, status, or material possessions. But Buddhist teachings encourage us to see that true success lies in the peace we feel when we follow our own path, a path that may not always align with society's expectations, but one that leads to true happiness and fulfillment. The Buddha himself was not interested in worldly success, but in understanding the nature of suffering and the way to overcome it. His path was one of wisdom, compassion, and deep inner peace, and it is a path we can all follow. One of the most famous teachings of Buddhism that relates to living with purpose is the concept of right livelihood from the Noble Eightfold Path. Right livelihood refers to making a living in a way that is in harmony with one's ethical values and spiritual goals. It encourages us to choose work and activities that contribute to our well-being and the well-being of others, rather than simply seeking wealth or status. This teaching reminds us that living with purpose is not just about the personal pursuit of happiness, but also about contributing positively to society. When we align our work, relationships, and actions with our values, we are living with purpose and helping to create a more harmonious world. In modern life, we may often feel pressured to follow a conventional path, but Buddhist wisdom teaches us to trust in our unique journey. Each person has a different calling, and true fulfillment comes from following that path, regardless of whether it fits into society's predefined molds. The more we connect with our inner purpose, the more we can contribute meaningfully to the world. Whether it's through creative work, service, or spiritual practice, living in alignment with our purpose leads to a deeper sense of peace and joy. In the end, the lesson from this chapter is clear. Living according to our true purpose brings meaning and fulfillment. When we listen to our hearts and follow the path that resonates with us, we experience the true happiness that comes from living authentically. The Buddha's teachings show us that true success is not measured by external achievements, but by the peace we find within ourselves when we live according to our own purpose. Life may be full of ups and downs, but peace is always within us. In the end, happiness is not something external, but rather how we choose to live and feel from within. I hope that the Buddhist lessons we explored today will serve as a guide, helping you discover your own inner calm. Remember, you have the power to shape your experience of each day. With patience and self-compassion, you can create a life of true freedom and happiness. Slow down, love yourself a little more, and let this journey begin today.